Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're still waiting on a few attendees to join, so if you could just bear with us for just maybe another 60 seconds or so, and then we'll get started. So the webinar will start momentarily. Thank you. Let's see, we've got a few more folks coming in. I'm going to go ahead and start with the introductions. So again, hello and welcome everyone. Appreciate your participation today. My name is Kathy Palmer and I'm filling in for Leah Strevel. You probably received several emails from her. Leah is the events coordinator, the events manager here at Inova Payroll, and unfortunately she had a situation come up that she's not able to join us today, but she will be back next week. But in the meantime, it's my pleasure to be here and to really host today's webinar. And this is the kickoff for the Inova webinar series for 2022. And it's really, we're going out with a bang. As you can see, today's topic is turning the Great Resignation into a great re-engagement. So it's a nice play on words, but very, very topical and relevant for today. I also wanted to say that I've been in the business for quite some time, and I have known Nathan Christensen, who is our speaker, for many years, and I've heard him speak on numerous occasions, and I'll have to say that they're all terrific, but this one in particular really resonated with me, and I believe it will with you as well. I think you'll walk away from today's presentation with a lot of takeaways and things that you can work from going forward. So I did want to just mention that this is today is being brought to you by Inova Payroll. Inova is a national payroll provider, HR provider. We have offices in 11 offices across the United States. We are a national provider. And in addition to payroll and HR services, we also offer HR outsourcing and benefits services. So if you would like to learn more about Inova, please visit our website at inovapayroll.com. A couple of housekeeping items. We are providing a SHRM and NASBA credit, 1 hour credit for today's webinar. So you will be receiving a certificate for that, along with a recording of today's presentation early next week when Leah returns. And then finally, I did want to share with you that we welcome your questions, and at the bottom of your screen is a Q&A widget. Feel free to put your questions in there. We will get with as many as possible. And well, thank you. We will get to as many of those questions as possible. And then if there's someone we have not gotten to, we will certainly get back to you later on that. So at this point, what I'd like to do is introduce you to John Thompson. John is the Vice President of Business Development at Inova, and he will be introducing our speaker. John?
Thanks, Kathy. I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Nathan Christensen. Nathan's the CEO of Inova Payroll's longstanding strategic partner, Mineral, the leader in on-demand HR and compliance solutions to more than 500,000 businesses nationwide. Nathan is a recognized industry leader, speaker, and writer on topics like leadership, HR strategy, and company culture. He's been named a game changer in the human resources field by Workforce Magazine, and his thought leadership has appeared in many publications, including Fast Company, Forbes, and the Washington Post. Nathan holds degrees from Stanford University and the University of Chicago Law School. We're honored to have him join us today to share his insights on the Great Resignation and how employers can turn this challenge into an opportunity to build a more loyal and engaged workforce. It's my pleasure to introduce Nathan and turn the floor over to him. Thanks, Nathan.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Kathy. Great to be here. As Kathy mentioned and John reiterated, my company Mineral has been a partner of Inova for many years, and we've always been honored to have that partnership. And we work with a number of payroll, HCM and HR companies across the country, and can just say that Inova is at the top of the list. The way that you folks work with your clients is really exceptional, and we're proud to be a partner of yours. As Kathy and John mentioned, our topic for today is the Great Resignation. And I wanted to just start this webinar by getting to know all of you who are attending. And if you could just put in the chat, I see Paul got us kicked off, but if you could just put in the chat where you're joining us from, it's always helpful to know what parts of the country folks are coming in from. Okay, Memphis, Chattanooga, this is great. New Orleans, awesome. Columbus, New York, Baton Rouge, good. We've got a lot of variety here. Palm Springs, Raleigh, excellent, thank you. Fort Myers, good. Texas, okay, great. Keep that coming in. It's very helpful to know a little bit about folks' backgrounds. This is going to be an interactive presentation, and so as Kathy mentioned, we invite your questions into the Q&A widget. We also invite your comments in the chat, and there will be some points in this presentation where we'll be doing some interactive things like polls. There will also be a point in the presentation where I'm going to ask you some questions. And so just like you just did in the chat a moment ago, if you can put your thoughts into the chat again when we get to those points of the presentation, that will really help us out. Okay, we're going to start off here by setting the stage in an interactive way and understanding, just as a starting point, where are we all coming from when we talk about the Great Resignation? This is going to be a word cloud that we're going to build here together. And the way that we do this, I need you to use your cell phone for this one. For the rest of the presentation, you can just use your laptop, keyboard, whatever you're working on. But for this, I need you to use your cell phone. And I need you to think of the word that comes to your mind first when you think of the phrase Great Resignation. And I need you to text that in, and we'll build a word cloud in real time. And the way you do that is in the to field of your text, you're going to type the number on the right-hand side, the upper right-hand side of the screen, 22333. And then in the body of the text, you're going to type 173798 space and the word that comes to your mind. And now we'll go straight into the polling software. And then in a minute, it will populate with whatever responses you have here live on the screen. So once again, open up your cell phone, open up your texting app, and send a text to the number 22333. And in the body, type 173798. That's the code for this particular question, a space, and then the word that comes to your mind. Okay, and we can see a number of responses coming in here: tired, exhausting, babies, turnover, panic, frustrating, frightening, burnout, expensive, stretched, flight, recruitment. And the larger the word, if you're familiar with word clouds, the larger the word, the more frequent that word is being used or texted in. So opportunity is now coming in, or opportunities. You can see a number of dissatisfaction, turnover, a number of more negative sentiments associated with Great Resignation. Okay, great. This is now stabilizing. If you haven't texted in yet, I'll give you another 30 seconds to do so in patience. These words are, I think, very reflective of the range of emotions that people feel about the Great Resignation and the range of experiences that people have. And my goal over the next 50 minutes or so is to frame the Great Resignation for you in a way that acknowledges the frustration and the challenges that it creates. But as Kathy and John said, also points out a potential opportunity here for you and your business to take advantage of what otherwise is a very challenging environment to set your business up for long-term success. And I can see a number of you are already thinking that way, given the opportunity looks to be the number one word coming through. And I want to come back to that a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, great. That gives us a very good foundation here. So let's move on to the first starting point. What is the Great Resignation? So for many businesses, the Great Resignation can feel intensely personal. The Great Resignation was coined by an academic 2 years ago to refer to record-setting numbers of employees who were leaving or expected to leave their companies. And it's also been called the Big Quit, and there are a number of other monikers for it, but it's referring to record-setting levels of of employee departures that we're seeing across the country. And although it can feel very personal for business owners or business leaders that have invested a lot in building relationships with their employees and engaging their employees and recruiting, hiring, onboarding, training their employees, it is in fact a national trend. And so again, although it can feel very personal, it's something that a lot of businesses are struggling with right now or experiencing. All right, I want to give you some more data on the Great Resignation in a minute, but let's get one more data point from the group here. And this is the first poll question I have. This is going to be a Zoom poll, so you won't need your cell phone. You can just hang out right here in the Zoom. And my first question is for you. How challenging has it been for your business to retain employees over the last 12 months compared to the prior 12 months? And let's bring up the poll here. Okay, perfect. So question one, how challenging has it been? And your 5 answer choices are much harder, harder, the same, easier, or much easier. So how hard has it been to retain employees over the last 12 months compared to the 12 months prior to that? And I'll give another 10 seconds or so for you to make your selection, and then we'll look at the group's answers. Okay, take another 5 seconds. All right, let's take a look at the responses. Okay, great. So 18% of us said that it's been much harder to retain employees over the last 12 months compared to the period before that. 56% said harder. So cumulatively between those two, we're looking at about 75% of the group said that it's been harder or much harder to retain. 24% of the group said it's the same, and 2% of our group here today said it's been easier. I would say I've given this talk a lot for audiences all over the country. These numbers are very, very representative of what I see for business owners and business leaders across the country. So it looks like this group is right in line with what we see nationally. All right, now I want to share some data with you that that will support, I think, the responses that you just gave. Okay, this is the number of Americans who voluntarily quit their jobs over the last 20 years. And you can see each year is mapped from 2001 through 2021. And you can see that the number, is clustered there across the middle with a large outlier across the top. And of course, that's 2021. And in 2021, we saw record-breaking numbers of employees leaving their jobs. And I want to stress that this is only voluntary quits. So this does not include folks who were terminated for performance issues, who were furloughed. This is people who voluntarily left their jobs. Over 47 million Americans left their jobs last year. Now, we don't have 2022 represented here, but I can tell you, you may have already seen the jobs report for the first part of the year has already come out, and there's no slowing down. The Great Resignation has continued at these levels into 2022, and so the trend continues. Now, I want to show you another slide because one of the common misconceptions for business owners and HR leaders across the country, and this graph supports it, is that this is an outlier. It is a record-setting trend, but I want to give a little bit different historical perspective. This is data from the Harvard Business Review, and it shows the quit rates for the last 12 years, the average monthly quit rate. And what this chart reinforces is just like the last one, 2022 was a record-setting year. More Americans quit their jobs in 2021 than at any point in recorded history. But you can see since the recession years of 2008, 2009, the average monthly quit rate has increased each year. And if you were to extrapolate the results from 2009 through 2019, you would see that you would forecast the levels of quit rates that you can see represented there in the red bars. So you can see 2020, the quit rate was way below what was forecasted based on the last 10 years of data. And of course, the reason for that was the COVID pandemic had landed in the US. People were very unsure about their job prospects, about their livelihood. And so people were not leaving their jobs. They were trying to hold on to the jobs that they had. So the quit rate came down. And of course, in 2021, it went roaring back and has actually exceeded the forecast, though potentially not as dramatically as some people think. So what's the key takeaway here? The key takeaway is that unless there's a very disruptive economic event for the country, the Great Resignation is not a blip. It's not a one-time event. It's part of a permanent trend and is probably not going away. Now, that can be a really unsettling thing to hear, but as we'll talk about here in this presentation, it also creates an opportunity for employers to differentiate themselves. All right, let's take a look at one more piece of data related to the Great Resignation. This is the geographic distribution of quits. And you can see the darker the color, the higher the quit rate by state. Now, I saw a lot of folks who were calling in from the Southeast today. You can see relatively high quit rates in the Southeast. So that would explain why many of you are finding it so hard to retain employees. There were elevated quit rates in every state across the country last year, but the ones that are shaded the darkest were the ones who were hit particularly hard. Now, I want to get to our second Zoom poll because, of course, all of this data just begs the question, why are employees quitting? Why are they leaving jobs in record numbers? So let's just crowdsource that answer for a minute. And let's bring up the Zoom poll and ask, what do you think is the #1 reason why employees are quitting? I provided a variety of options here for you to choose from. You could choose benefits. People are leaving to get better benefits from a different employer. They're leaving to get more compensation, more money from a different employer. They're leaving for better hours or more flexibility, the ability to work from home, things like that. They're leaving because they're moving to a new location. They're leaving because they have concerns about the pandemic and don't want to be exposed to the public or colleagues or something like that. They're leaving because they're opting out of the workforce entirely, or they're leaving because they're starting a new career, or maybe there's another reason that you're seeing as the most prevalent one. So let's take a minute here. I really want to see your responses to this. I'll give about 10 more seconds for you to select which you think is the #1 reason why employees are leaving their jobs today. Okay, 5 more seconds. Okay, let's see where we're at. Okay, interesting. So the #1 answer from this group is people are leaving their jobs for better hours, more flexibility, and followed by compensation. A distant third are folks who are opting out of the workplace entirely. I would say both of those, hours and flexibility and compensation, yes, are generally given as the top 2 reasons why people are leaving their jobs. And it sounds like this group's experience is consistent with that. Okay, great. All right, I want to try to frame up a way of thinking about the compensation, the flexibility, and all the other options that we just gave for reasons why people might quit in sort of a unifying framework that I think will help us think about, okay, how do we create an opportunity here? Right now, there are 3 dynamics happening in the job market. And I don't need to tell you about these. I'm sure you're experiencing them directly, but we have a very hot job market. There is more demand for labor than there is supply for labor. The unemployment rate is at record lows, and you can just drive around your community, and I'm sure you can see the help wanted signs everywhere. So we have a very hot job market. It's an employee job market. The second dynamic we have is, of course, the global pandemic. Now, infection rates are down, transmission rates are down, but over the last 2 years, the pandemic has disrupted a lot of the routines, a lot of the assumptions, a lot of the conventions that people were used to. And several studies have revealed what is referred to as the epiphany theory. After a highly disruptive event like a global pandemic, people think about their lives differently. They prioritize differently. They have an epiphany about what they really care about and might not be the same things as they cared about prior to the event. So that's the second major event happening in the job market. And the third, of course, is the proliferation of remote work. So now more than ever, people can work from wherever they want to. The jobs are available. They're not tied to major metropolitan areas where there's density of employers. And that has created new opportunities for employees that they are now attuned to. There's been a lot of data, particularly out of LinkedIn, about the proliferation of remote work, and it's staggering the number of jobs now that are being posted as remote friendly, remote first, or remote only. These three dynamics are causing employees to think differently about their job opportunities. And the framework that we think about it is in terms of employee wellness. Employees are thinking about how can they optimize or how can they maximize their wellness in this environment where they have a hot job market. They've reevaluated the priorities they have in their life due to this global pandemic, and they have more options across the country than they used to because of the proliferation of remote work. And employee wellness, we think about on 5 different dimensions. The first is physical wellness. This is probably the most straightforward, but in thinking about how do I make sure that I'm in a safe and a healthy environment for me physically, or that I'll have flexibility in my job so that I can do things like work out, take bike rides, take walks, things like that. Mental wellness. This has been obviously something that a lot of employers have been talking about recently, but self-explanatory. People's mental wellness, mental well-being, striking the right balance between professional and personal, and keeping stress levels at the right level. Professional wellness, career opportunities, career advancements. Financial wellness speaks for itself, but the compensation or other rewards that people can get from working. And then social wellness, people's ability to create connections, important, meaningful connections for them, or nurture the connections that they have outside of work, having time to do those things. These are the 5 dimensions of employee wellness. And what we see right now is employees trying to maximize one or more of these dimensions in making their job choices. Now, for some employees, it may be trying to maximize all 5. Others may care about 1 or 2. It really varies from person to person. And it's part of the reason why in addressing the Great Resignation, it's important to have both macro strategies, strategies that you're using across your workforce or across your employee base, across your company, and micro strategies, strategies that are specific to a specific employee and what they care about. So if this is what employees are thinking about right now, if this is what they're trying to maximize, as they think about the opportunities they have in the workforce, what's the opportunity for your business? As we talked about, right now we have a more intentional workforce. The data would say the most intentional workforce we've ever had in terms of people making very deliberate choices and being very picky about the jobs that they are accepting or staying in. The opportunity here is to turn that intentional workforce into a more engaged and loyal team for your company. And by extension, to create a more productive and successful company through that engaged and loyal team. Now we'll walk through this. We're going to pay special attention to the first linkage. How do you take an intentional workforce and turn it into an engaged team? But we don't want to forget the link there between an engaged team and a more productive and successful company. And here I have one more poll for you. Higher employee engagement has been shown to be positively influence which of the following business metrics. So I want you to think about your experience, about what you've read, and in thinking about that third link between an engaged team and a successful business, what do you think are the key business metrics or business outcomes that employee engagement can affect? And let's bring up that poll, and here we go, perfect, and get your answers. Do you think that it affects growth? Does it drive innovation? Does it drive productivity, customer satisfaction, profitability, employee retention? Which of those business outcomes do you think higher employee engagement is associated with? We'll give 10 more seconds here. All right, let's take a look at the results. Employee retention, number 1, productivity, number 2. That looks like innovation, number 3. Great. But the important takeaway here is that it looks like many of you chose more than one. It looks like some of you chose all of them. And in fact, there is statistical support, business research to show that employee engagement drives all of these outcomes. And so if we can somehow turn that intentional workforce, people who are making very deliberate decisions, thinking hard about the jobs that they want right now, into an engaged team, we can see a lot of success for our businesses. So how do we do that? Well, I want to flash back to 2008, because although the Great Resignation is a new concept, this idea of turning an intentional workforce into an engaged workforce, into a successful business, isn't new. In the chat, I would love to see, and there are some hints on the screen here, but does anyone recognize this company? Anyone? Victoria, thank you. You nailed it, Zappos. So for anyone who has, and actually, let me just ask in the chat again, has anyone visited the Zappos headquarters in Las Vegas? No, no. Yes, okay, Terry, you have, great. Okay, it looks like not many have. It's a unique experience. It looks exactly like the picture here. As many of you who are probably familiar with the company Zappos know, Zappos came to fame because of its customer obsession, and it developed this very unique culture that was really focused on customer obsession and customer service. And it won a lot of awards for its culture and went on to have a lot of commercial success. And this is what the Zappos experience looks like. Now, the next time you're in Las Vegas, I actually don't know if they're still doing this post-pandemic, but if you go to Las Vegas, you used to have an opportunity to tour the Zappos office, and it was called the Zappos Culture Tour. And Terry, it looks like you might have done this. Fantastic. So Zappos would welcome people in, the public, and they would take you on a tour of their office, and they would talk about how they built such a unique culture. What were their culture building blocks, their values? What techniques did they have? What best practices did they have? What was their programming and benefits like? Now think about that for a second. Zappos's entire strategic advantage was based on its culture. It was selling the same products as other companies, but it built this very unique culture that was driven to deliver a great customer experience. Imagine other companies. Imagine Coca-Cola, right? Coca-Cola's competitive advantage was its formula for the Coke product. Imagine Coca-Cola sharing its formula for Coke with the public. We wouldn't see that. But why can a company like Zappos, whose strategic advantage is built around such a unique culture, feel like it can bring the public in and share the DNA of its culture, share its secret formula with the public, and not worry about somebody coming in and and stealing their culture? The reason is culture is very hard to copy, and Zappos realized that. And in 2008, Zappos pioneered a very unique and groundbreaking HR program. Anyone remember what Zappos did in 2008 that caught the HR world by surprise? If you do, put it in the chat here. They launched a specific policy. Okay, they allowed employees to choose where the work they wanted to do. That's right, they gave a lot of employee autonomy. But there was a specific policy they implemented that seemed totally counterintuitive at first. Unlimited PTO. Yes, they did have very flexible PTO. I don't remember if it was unlimited at that time. But the policy I'm thinking of is Zappos invented what's now called pay to quit. So Zappos would pay employees, they would challenge employees, I think on their 6-month anniversary, the 12-month anniversary, and tell employees, we're going to pay you $5,000 or $10,000 to leave right now, because we want you to think really hard about whether you actually want to be here. And if you do, we want you to be here and we want to make it really successful. And if we don't, we want you to be honest with yourself and with us about that. We want to, incentivize you to then leave and choose something else to do. It was called pay to quit. Other companies have adopted it since, but in 2008, the CEO of Zappos, Tony Hsieh, published a paper where he was explaining their pay to quit program, and it caught a lot of people by surprise. Well, one way to think about the Great Resignation today is that it's borrowing on the same principle for employers as the pay to quit program for Zappos back in 2008. In 2008, what Zappos was trying to do is they were trying to challenge employees. They're actually trying to incentivize employees to leave so that employees would think really hard about whether they actually wanted to be there, how committed they were to the business and to the work and to the customers. And not just in an abstract way, but in a very specific way with a monetary reward associated with leaving if they decided they weren't sufficiently committed. And for employers, in some ways, that's exactly what the Great Resignation is doing today. Although it's not an employer providing a reward to their employees to leave, it's other employers coming in and trying to recruit them away or offer higher compensation or different benefits. But it's challenging employees to think with that same intentionality about what is their level of commitment to the job, to the customer, to the team, to the company that they're working with today. And there's, just like Zappos and Tony Hsieh realized back in 2008, there's an opportunity there for the employers that think about it that way. Now, Zappos wasn't making this up out of thin air. Back 7 years earlier, 6 years earlier, in the early 2000s, researchers at the Stanford Graduate School of Business did a study. And they wanted to answer a very simple question, which was, why did some companies in that first dot-com boom of the early 2000s, why did some companies make it big, like a Google? And why did other companies like Excite not do well, flounder? And you can see this is a screenshot from Google on its very first day of launch. And this is a screenshot of Excite, not on its first day, but in its first couple of years of operating. And that first dot-com boom in Silicon Valley created winners and losers at the extreme. Companies that had success like we had never seen before, and companies that raised a lot of money or brought in a lot of people, created a lot of customers, but ultimately failed. And the Stanford researchers wanted to figure out why. Now, they studied about 500 organizations, most of whom were growth-oriented businesses in Silicon Valley. And they tried to look for common themes across these businesses. And they ended up seeing 5 different models that these businesses had implemented. And you can think about these as culture models. The first one was a bureaucratic model. Now, a bureaucratic model is where you have a highly successful executive or executive team that's coming from a much larger company. You know, at that time, it may have been a company like IBM or Bank of America. And they go to start a new business and they bring in very, very mature processes into a small business. And it's called bureaucratic because, you know, it's a process-focused company. The second model is the star model. Now, these were the companies that they just went out and they hired the most expensive people with the fanciest resumes they could find. And they brought them into the company and they basically said, okay, you're a bunch of very capable people, experienced people, and we're putting you in the same 4 walls and we want to see what you can do. That's the star model. The third model is the engineering model. So you might think about this in present day terms as maybe like a Tesla or a SpaceX. It's a company that is entirely focused on solving a technology problem or opportunity. The fourth model is the autocratic model. So this is a very charismatic founder or CEO who comes into a company, puts the company on their back and tries to charge forward through the strength of their personality and their ideas and their vision. And the fifth model is the commitment model. For these businesses, they focused on creating strong intellectual and emotional commitments between their employees and each other, their customers, and their mission. So it's a strong sense of commitment to your colleagues, your mission, and your customer. Now, there were winners and losers in all 5 of these models. So it's not that one is always perfect and the others are terrible or vice versa. But there was one model that across these 500 businesses and across a decade or 2 of experience had a higher rate of success than every other model, and not by a little bit. Love to see in the chat, which of these models do you think had far and away the highest likelihood of success for these companies? Thank you, Amy. Okay, it looks like the group is pretty well aligned here. The prevailing view is commitment, and you're exactly right. The commitment companies had the highest rate of success and much higher than the other 4. Again, it's not that there weren't successes from the other 4, but across the entire group, those are the companies that really succeeded. So we know that there's research to support this idea that when you have strong employee commitment, strong sense of commitment to each other, to the mission, to the customers, just like Zappos realized, good things, great things can happen. So how do you create an employee base that's thinking really hard about their job opportunities right now, that's really committed to your business? Well, I have 5 steps to take, and I'm going to move through the first 4 relatively quickly and then spend a little more time on the 5th because it's probably the least intuitive. So here we go. First tip for you is to focus on what we call prevention, not chasing employees. We get asked a lot about, for guidance on when an employee is, saying that they have another offer, another opportunity, they hand in their resignation. Should employers go and try to save them? And in almost all cases, the answer is no. As hard as it may be, as sad as it may be, it does more harm than good to try to convince an employee who's already decided to leave to stay than it is to figure out a graceful transition for them. It can create challenging precedent for other employees if you're known to try to chase people down and bring them back. It can also cause you to retain employees who aren't really committed to your business, but are just hanging in there because you offered them some short-term incentive. And in a way, you're sort of kicking the can down the road on the underlying issue. I would encourage you to think about an employee's decision to leave your company as 2 key decision points. The first decision point is when an employee decides that they need to start looking for new opportunities. They pick up the phone when the recruiter calls, or they respond to the email from the recruiter, or they start asking their friends or their colleagues about different opportunities out there. And the second decision point is when they actually decide to select one of those opportunities over their current job. I would encourage you and your teams to focus on the first decision point. How do you keep employees really engaged, really satisfied, really excited, so that when they receive calls from recruiters, when they hear about different opportunities, they don't even want to listen to those. They want to stay in their existing job with their existing company, with their existing team. Because once an employee has decided that it's time to look for something new, there's always going to be a different or a better job offer out there, unless you choose to pay, the highest price on the market. And so much better to think about prevention. How do you keep your employees engaged? They're focused on their job, their team, the community they've got today, and aren't spending time looking for different opportunities because they're so satisfied with their experience. Much better to do that than try to chase people as they're walking out the door. Okay, second tip, adapt your hiring. We already talked, and I think we know intuitively that people today are thinking about their job choices very carefully, and they're thinking about it on a deeper level than potentially they have historically. I showed you those 5 dimensions of wellness: financial wellness, mental wellness, physical wellness, social wellness, career wellness. They're thinking about all of those dimensions and how any particular opportunity can serve those dimensions. Now, the best thing to do is adapt your hiring process to meet them where they're at. If your candidates who are thinking about coming into your business are already thinking that hard about their job choices and about their own personal priorities and what they care about, have the conversation with them, open the line of communication and ask them, what do they care about? What are they looking to prioritize today? Where do they want to be in 5 years? What do they want to tell their friends, their neighbors, their kids, their parents, whoever it is, that they accomplished 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Adapt your hiring to go to that level of questioning, because then you'll discover which of those candidates you're going to have really strong long-term alignment with. The folks who prioritize the same things that you prioritize. Maybe it's compensation, maybe it's rewards, maybe it's work-life balance, whatever it is in your business that you're trying to optimize for your employees. You want to make sure that you have really good alignment with the candidates who are coming in on those dimensions, and that will create great long-term fit and minimize the risk of churn later. So adapt your hiring process if you haven't already, especially in that interview process, to really get to know candidates and what they care about at a deeper level than you may have before. Okay, step 3, invest in training. One of the number 1 reasons why people leave their jobs is because they believe that they can advance their careers further or faster in a different opportunity. And so investing in training shows your employees that they're going to have great opportunities by staying within your business. And we've talked to businesses that shifted some of their recruiting budget into training, and they saw great outcomes because now they had less turnover, so they didn't need to recruit as much, Their employees got more engaged, they got more productive, and they stayed longer. So training, I know it's very familiar, it's not a new concept, but it's more important than ever to be investing in now. And a lot of businesses that are on the smaller side, are stuck in a way because they can't afford sort of the fancy corporate training programs that maybe large businesses can. But smaller businesses can get really creative, and they have advantages large businesses don't. And one of the great things that I've seen small or mid-sized businesses do is they actually leverage the skills and the capabilities of the people within the business to create the training programs. So they find somebody in the business who's, really good at PowerPoint, or really good at delivering a presentation, or really good with Excel, really good at graphic design, whatever it is, really good at interviewing. And they ask those people in the business to create a training module for their colleagues. And then they create a lunch and learn and invite people to come in and learn from their colleagues. And it can be a really efficient, effective way to not only build relationships among your team, but also deliver skills training to your team. Okay, step 4, conduct stay interviews. Now, we've probably all heard about the concept of exit interviews. Probably many of us have done them or experienced them. And an exit interview, of course, is when an employee is leaving your business. You have an intentional conversation about that employee before they leave to understand, why are you leaving? What's the reason behind your decision to leave your job, your company, your manager, whatever it is? And then you get feedback on the business, and then you try to address the pain points that person may have experienced. Those are important. But what's often overlooked is getting that same feedback from the people who have not chosen to leave, who have chosen to stay in your business. A stay interview is relatively simple. We suggest that you do it with an employee at least once a year. And it's in a conversation between an employee and their manager, just finding out, how are things going? What's going really well today? What's not going well today? What's caused you to stay in this job, stay with this company, stay with this team? What are you loving about it today? And what are the pain points that either you or I as your manager or the company can help address in the upcoming year to make sure the relationship gets even better? Now, companies that are larger it can be impractical to do stay interviews with every employee, but you can be more targeted about your efforts. And for smaller businesses, again, you have a competitive advantage of intimacy with your employees, where you can have these types of conversations on a one-to-one basis with every employee in your business once a year and get great data about what their experience is like. And also, back to the prevention point, identify what are the pain points that you can deal with on the front end so your employees continue to stay with your business. Okay, now I get to step 5. And this is the one I want to spend a little time on because this is a little bit less straightforward or familiar to a lot of folks. Step 5 is inviting your employees to be co-creators in your business. This is a very powerful concept that we have seen utilized with a lot of success by a lot of businesses. Now, I just want to ask, and would be interested in any comments in the chat here. Why do you think that I have chosen to include a picture of a cake as we talk about inviting your employees to be co-creators? Any guesses as to what the connection is between a Betty Crocker cake and this idea? Many ingredients. Okay, great. Very creative. I like that. Any other ideas? Okay, Julianne, I think everybody likes yours the best. Many ingredients is a very good answer, but there's actually a more specific reason. All mixed up together where you can have your cake and eat it too. I like it. It may need time to bake. Great. All of those are very good kind of figurative ways to link these two concepts. But I actually want to be more literal. I want you to go back 60 years, 70 years in history, 75 years in history, and think about where we were as a country back then. World War II had just ended. The GIs were coming back from overseas, and the baby boom generation was being born, right? People were having lots of big families, and households were being stretched thin, even though I think it was a relatively joyous time. Households were being stretched thin on time and money because they were having these big families, and of course they needed to find a way to support all of these kids. Now, Betty Crocker saw an opportunity in this. because Betty Crocker said, well, these American households, they still want to have homemade, goods like cakes around the house to feed their families, feed their friends, feed their neighbors, but they're crunched on time. And we think we can solve this. And the way we're going to solve this is we're going to create something called a box cake, where we're going to put all the ingredients together and make it really easy for American households to bake a cake. It's going to take you 30 minutes start to finish. Now, they thought they were onto something really big, and they built a huge marketing program to support the launch of the box cake. And they thought once it hit the grocery store shelves, Betty Crocker, would rise to entirely new heights and take the country with it. And so they did that. They created the box cake. It was a huge pioneering invention. They shipped it out to grocery stores, and they just waited for the sales to start. But guess what happened? Nobody bought it. Not nobody, but very few people. The executives at Betty Crocker couldn't believe it. How had this invention that they thought was so perfect for the demand in the economy, how had it flopped so big? So they hired a lot of very fancy, high-priced consultants to help them figure it out. They did taste tests, and nope, American consumers said, no, actually this box cake tastes really good. We like it. They did marketing studies, and consumers said, no, we understand this product. We understand the value it brings to us. That no confusion there. They did all of these studies to try to figure out what it was, and they were getting nowhere until a consultant out of New York stumbled onto something as he was doing very deep focus groups with American consumers. And what he found is that American consumers, and specifically at the time, American housewives, didn't feel a sense of pride in serving a box cake. And that's why they wouldn't buy it. They didn't feel like buying something off the shelf, putting it into a bowl, putting some water in it, putting it in the oven, gave them that sense of pride in delivering something good for their families and friends. So this feedback was delivered to Betty Crocker, and the team at Betty Crocker went to work to try to figure out what they could do to solve this problem. Because of course, the whole point of the box cake was to make it easy and efficient to bake a cake. And they stumbled on to something. They changed the recipe in one important way. They changed the recipe by taking out the dehydrated egg that had been included before and asking consumers to crack a fresh egg and put it in the mix when they mix it up and produce the cake. That's it. You add the eggs for that special homemade goodness. And guess what? The cakes started flying off the shelves. This one change caused a sea change in the demand for this product, because now American households felt like they were putting something of themselves, an egg that they had chosen and had to crack, had to buy, all those things, into the recipe, and that they could now serve the cake with a sense of pride and satisfaction. Now, fast forward 60 years, and researchers at Harvard stumble onto something in a totally different field, but I think is very similar. The researchers at Harvard were essentially asking consumers to attach a value to the goods and products that they have around their house. And they found that people were attaching a higher value to IKEA furniture than they did to similar furniture from other furniture stores. And as they dug into this, they discovered the same thing, that when people put their blood, sweat, and tears into something, then they attach a higher value to it. Now, that may not be your personal experience with IKEA. I know I once lived in a high-rise in Chicago, and one night the police department got called because there was a lot of noise and commotion coming from one of the apartments on our floor. And the police came and knocked on the door, expecting there might be some sort of domestic disturbance, only to find a couple trying to assemble an IKEA wardrobe. So not everybody has a joyous experience assembling IKEA furniture, but by and large, people attach a higher value to IKEA furniture or other products that they have to put their own creativity or effort or labor into than they do other products. So what's the lesson here for creating an engaged team, creating a culture that has a sense of commitment to the organization and to each other? Well, the lesson is just like with the Betty Crocker cakes, just like the IKEA furniture. Employers can create a sense of co-creation within your business for your employees. You can create task forces where they can define your company values. They can name your conference rooms. They can name your products, whatever it is, where they can see their fingerprints or their IKEA furniture all over the office. And they can feel like they're putting their creativity, their ideas, their labor into the workplace in the same way that the business owners and the business leaders are. And if you can do that, if you can bring your employees into the workplace at a different level, at that co-creator level, all of this research says they'll value that workplace higher and they'll have a stronger sense of commitment to it. So let's go back to the 3 steps here. Right now, we've got a more intentional workplace. People are being pickier about the jobs that they take. They're thinking harder about the jobs out there, the jobs they have, the jobs they might have, and how it supports those 5 dimensions of wellness. The trick is to take that intentionality and turn it into an engaged team through the steps that I outlined by not chasing people, but focusing on the people you have, training them, having stay interviews with them, creating co-creator relationships with them so they feel a high sense of purpose, a high sense of commitment in the business. And if you can do that, you can create a more productive and successful company for the long term. That's the opportunity buried here in what's otherwise a very challenging situation for employers with the Great Resignation. And I will stop there and would love to take any questions in the chat here or in the Q&A on anything that we've discussed. So I'll give you a minute to put in any questions and then we can talk through them. And as Kathy said, if we don't have time to answer all the questions now, we can get back to you afterwards. Okay, question on, so how do you create the co-creator aspect? And you know, it takes creativity. It takes thinking about, okay, how can you engage your employees on a different level than you might have before? And you just have to be looking for those opportunities. I mentioned, you know, allowing employees to do things like name the conference rooms in your business, or name the products in your business, or create the traditions of your business. You know, a few years ago here at Mineral, we had a group of employees who, you know, this is prior to the pandemic, but we asked them, hey, help us create some traditions to build closer relationships among employees. And they created great traditions or great programs. One's called Common Grounds, and that's where a group of between 6 to 8 employees gets together, goes for coffee, and has a structured discussion about, it could be about work, it could be about life, but it builds those relationships. And the people that created that program see their idea living and breathing in the company every day. And again, it fosters that sense of co-creation, that sense of commitment. Okay, next question. What recommendations do you have for driving engagement in a remote workforce? This is the challenge of the day. And you know, for anybody that has either a hybrid team or a remote team, you know, one of the #1 questions we get is, how do you maintain that sense of culture and engagement? The key is to look at what you've done previously that worked, right? What drove engagement before, and think about how you can do that now remotely. You know, an example, I just gave the Common Grounds example, right? Where we had employees go to coffee once a month. When the pandemic first hit and we all went remote, we canceled that program because we were thinking about it in the way that it had always lived in the company before. And one day it dawned on us that actually we could do the same thing remotely. And so now we operate the same program. We send out Starbucks gift cards and we invite groups of 6 to 8 people to get together remotely, each of whom has a coffee as they do, and have the same type of conversation. So, you know, it's really about looking at what drove engagement in your company before and how do you translate that to a remote environment. There are also lots of programs that have emerged that companies can take advantage of. So a popular one is to do trivia night. Trivia night, across the team. So invite your employees to come. They get into teams and they do a facilitated trivia night with a facilitator, and that can be a great way to build engagement. In a more business-oriented context, companies have adopted something called Ask Me Anything sessions. We do this at Mineral. We use Slack at Mineral. And so every 6 weeks, the executive team jumps on a specific Slack channel at 9:30 in the morning on a Friday. And the session is called Ask Me Anything. Anybody in the company can put out an idea, put out a concern, put out a question, and our executive team will offer their perspective. Then we'll invite other people to come in and offer their perspective on it too. So again, it's a way to create relationships, understanding, engagement across the company. So there are lots of techniques like that that work as well. There are also, virtual cooking classes, things like that, to drive that employee engagement. And then, of course, a lot of companies, including ours, are still doing offsites to bring people together in person periodically, even though you can't be together every day like potentially they were in the past. Okay, in the healthcare environment, where there are many regulations, how would the co-creator aspect work? Well, I've never operated a healthcare business, but I've heard this question before, and companies have found, again, very creative solutions. You do have a more limited set of options for things that employees could create in the business. But again, there might be some informal traditions that could be created by employees. There could be office decoration. You saw the Zappos picture, right, where people, that itself would not work in a healthcare setting. Zappos is an extreme, but where people can bring some of their personality, bring some of their family, their experience into work in a very visual way for the team. So, you have to look for those opportunities too. And in the healthcare setting and some others, they may be more limited, but I bet you'll find some good ones. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. How do you keep employees engaged in an environment where they are sometimes working 7 days a week? Yes, so this is very challenging. And I think the root of the question is, how do you keep employees engaged when there's limited time to do things other than the actual production work of the business? And the key is, can you carve out little slivers of time for employees to engage with each other outside of the tasks that they're being asked to do? Can they, engage with each other in terms of, that relationship building? Can they engage with the business in terms of turning their ideas, their concerns, their thoughts into, actual practices in the business? But when people are working, around the clock or 7 days a week, you just have to look for those opportunities. The other component here is when people are working really hard, one of the most effective techniques is to keep them focused on the purpose or mission of the business. They're so into the day-to-day, that production environment, it can be easy to lose track of why. Why am I doing this? Why am I, working this hard? And reminding them of the purpose of the business, the purpose of the organization can be very powerful. There's some research again out of Harvard that shows that the number one way to engage an employee who's drifting out, into disengagement is to bring them close to the customer. Find a way for them to interact directly with a customer or hear from a customer or see a customer experience. And that's actually a really important way to engage people, because people derive a lot of satisfaction from seeing the impact of their work on, somebody outside the business. Okay, let's see. Okay, great. It looks like I'm just looking through the chat here. It looks like there are some really good practices that people are already implementing, which is great. And the question on local government, I would answer it in the same way that we talked about in the healthcare environment. There may be, you may have more limitations on what you can do in terms of employees becoming co-creators in the business. But I think if you look for the opportunities, you'll find some. They may be on a different scale than other businesses, but I have not found an employer yet who hasn't found a way to bring employee creativity into the workplace and get employees engaged, not just in their day-to-day job, but in really shaping the workplace and in shaping the company. So Kathy, it was a real pleasure to be with Inova today and all the folks on the call. I really appreciate the interaction and the engagement, the great questions and comments. And I would just again encourage everybody on this call. The Great Resignation is not going away anytime soon, unless we have a pretty catastrophic economic event that causes people to the job market to really close up. So we're going to be living with this, and I would just encourage you to think about the environment we're in and what opportunities it creates for your business, and specifically what opportunities it creates for you to create that really engaged and loyal team that you can then use to create a great business.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Nathan. You did a terrific job, and we can tell from the comments that everybody was very engaged and excited to hear what you had to share today. So I want to thank all of you for participating. We had a great group today. As you exit, you will receive a link to a survey. So please take less than 60 seconds to fill that out. Let us know how you felt about this presentation. Give us some suggestions for additional topics that you would like to see, because we have really a number of these that we'll be offering over the next several months here at Inova. I also wanted to remind you that your certificates with the activity IDs for your credit will, as well as the recording, will be sent to you early next week. I want to thank everybody again for your participation and hope you all have a wonderful and great day. Thank you.